Everybody in the world wants to interview Doris Day. No, she said it's real. Because her son, Terry, has found a lost record. And she's
4 generations of movie lovers. Doris Day represented the bright, joyful side of Hollywood. Her voice was warm, her smile unforgettable, and her presence on screen seemed to promise a world where everything would eventually turn out right. From romantic comedies to musical classics, she became one of the most beloved stars of the 1950s and 1960s. To the public, her life looked almost perfect. Fame, success, and admiration from millions of fans around the world. Yet behind that cheerful image was a private life filled with struggles, difficult relationships, and deeply guarded secrets that only a few people ever truly understood. For many years, Doris Day carefully protected her personal world from the public eye. Even as tabloids speculated about her marriages, career decisions, and sudden departure from Hollywood, she remained quiet. She rarely addressed rumors and almost never spoke openly about the more painful chapters of her life. Friends often described her as warm and kind, but also intensely private. It was as if the woman the world adored on screen had built a protective wall around her real life, allowing only a handful of trusted people inside. Among those closest to her family was her only son, Terry Melcher. Terry carved out his own path in the entertainment industry, becoming a successful music producer during the 1960s and 1970s. While his mother was famous for her films and singing career, Terry found success behind the scenes, working with musicians and shaping the sound of a generation. Despite their busy careers, mother and son remained deeply connected, and Doris often spoke proudly about him in interviews. In many ways, Terry was the center of her world years later. Terry would have a son of his own, Ryan Melcher. As Doris Day's only grandson, Ryan grew up knowing that his grandmother was a legendary figure in American entertainment. Yet when he was young, their relationship felt surprisingly normal. He visited her home, spent time with her, and experienced moments that seemed no different from those shared between many grandparents and grandchildren. To him, she was not just a Hollywood icon. She was simply his grandmother. But as time passed, circumstances within the family began to change. Careers evolved, personal challenges appeared, and the once close connections within the family slowly became more complicated. Much of this happened quietly, away from the public eye. Doris Day had long been known for keeping personal matters private, and the growing distance between family members was something she never publicly discussed. Then tragedy struck the family in a way that changed everything. In 2004, Terry Melcher passed away after battling cancer. His death devastated Doris Day. Losing her only child was a heartbreak that deeply affected her emotionally and spiritually. For someone who had already experienced many hardships in her life, including difficult marriages and financial betrayal early in her career, this loss was almost unbearable. In the years that followed Terry's death, Ryan hoped to reconnect more closely with his grandmother. Both had suffered the same loss, and it seemed natural that they might find comfort in supporting each other. According to Ryan, there were plans at one point to meet and spend time together again. But for reasons that were never fully explained, that reunion never took place. The distance between them grew, and eventually their contact stopped altogether. What happened next remained one of the most surprising revelations about Doris Day's later life. Ryan later shared that he had not spoken to or seen his grandmother for many years. As time passed, the separation became permanent. While Doris continued living quietly in California, focusing on animal welfare and charitable work, her grandson was building a life of his own. Doris Day had long since stepped away from Hollywood. After leaving the entertainment industry, she dedicated herself to protecting animals and supporting charitable causes. Her love for animals became one of the defining passions of her later years. She established foundations, worked with rescue groups, and used her fame to raise awareness about animal welfare. In many ways, this chapter of her life meant even more to her than her career in films and music. Despite her quiet lifestyle, curiosity about her life never faded. Fans around the world continued to admire her work and wondered what her life was like away from the spotlight. Yet she rarely granted interviews and carefully maintained her privacy. For decades, she managed to keep many details of her personal world hidden from public view. Then, after her passing in 2019 at the age of 97, a new chapter of the story began to emerge. Ryan Melcher began speaking more openly about his experiences and the distance that had grown between him and his famous grandmother. By that time, he was in his early 40s and had established himself as a successful real estate professional. His reflections offered a rare glimpse into a family story that had remained hidden for years. Ryan explained that learning about his grandmother's death was a deeply emotional moment for him. According to his account, he discovered the news the same way many fans did, through social media and public announcements. The revelation shocked many people who assumed that family members would have been closely involved during the final days of such a legendary figure. His story sparked conversations among fans and observers about what might have happened behind the scenes. Some wondered whether misunderstandings, outside influences, or complicated family dynamics had contributed to the separation. Others pointed out that Doris Day had always been fiercely protective of her privacy and personal life. Whatever the reasons, the situation highlighted just how little the public truly knew about the private struggles of one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Despite the sadness surrounding the distance between them, Ryan has often spoken about his grandmother with respect and admiration. He remembers the kindness she showed him when he was young and the warmth that made her beloved by so many people. Those childhood memories remain an important part of his story, even as questions about the later years of their relationship continue to linger. In the end, Doris Day's life was far more complex than the cheerful image many people saw on screen. She experienced enormous success, but also endured heartbreak, betrayal, and personal loss. Through it all, she chose to keep many aspects of her life hidden from the public. Perhaps that was her way of protecting herself after decades in an industry that often exposed every detail of a star's life today. Her legacy continues to shine through her films, music, and the charitable work she devoted herself to in her later years. Millions still remember her as a voice and face of a brighter era in Hollywood. Yet the revelations shared by her grandson remind us that even the most beloved stars carry private stories the world may never fully understand. As the years passed after Doris Day stepped away from the spotlight, the world slowly grew accustomed to seeing less and less of the woman who had once dominated Hollywood screens. The cheerful star who had lit up cinemas during the golden age of film had chosen a life of quiet reflection instead of continued fame. Living in the peaceful seaside town of Carmel by the Sea in California, she built a life that was far removed from the bright lights and constant attention that once surrounded her. Neighbors often described her as gentle, polite, and deeply devoted to animals. For Doris, this slower life was not a retreat. It was a relief to the public. Her disappearance from Hollywood was mysterious. Many fans wondered why someone so successful would walk away at the height of her popularity. The truth was far more complicated than most people realized. Doris Day had spent decades navigating an industry that could be both glamorous and unforgiving. Early in her career, she had experienced personal betrayals, including financial mismanagement that left her with massive debt she never expected. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, she continued working tirelessly, even starring in television projects she never originally planned to do, simply to recover financially. Those experiences changed her deeply. They taught her to be cautious about trust and careful about who she allowed into her personal world. Over time, that caution turned into a kind of emotional distance that many people around her quietly noticed. She remained kind and gracious in public, but those closest to her knew she preferred to keep her circle small. When her son Terry Melcher was alive, that circle still felt secure. Terry had been more than just a child. He had been a companion, her confidant, and someone she trusted completely. His presence gave her a sense of family stability that she had not always experienced in her earlier years. So when he passed away in 2004 after a long battle with cancer, the loss created a silence in her life that could never truly be filled. Friends later said that Terry's death affected Doris more deeply than anything else she had faced before. Losing her only child at such an advanced stage in her life brought an overwhelming sense of grief. For someone who had always valued family above fame, it was a devastating blow. In the years that followed, she became even more private, focusing her attention almost entirely on her charitable work and the animals she loved so much. During this time, her grandson Ryan Melcher was entering adulthood and trying to find his own path. Growing up with a famous grandmother had always been an unusual experience, but Ryan rarely spoke about it publicly when he was younger. Instead, he focused on building his own life and career. Eventually, he became a successful real estate professional in California, working in areas not far from where his grandmother lived. Yet despite the physical distance between their lives being relatively small, the emotional distance between them seemed much larger. Ryan would later explain that their contact had faded over time, leaving him unsure about how or when the separation truly began. What started as occasional distance eventually turned into complete silence. For many observers, this revelation was difficult to understand. The idea that a world-famous grandmother and her only grandson could go years without contact seemed almost unimaginable. But those who had followed Doris Day's life closely knew that she had always been extremely protective of her personal space. After decades of living under the microscope of fame, she valued peace and control over her environment more than anything else that in her later years. Doris dedicated nearly all of her energy to the cause that had become her greatest passion, animal welfare. She founded organizations devoted to protecting animals from neglect and cruelty, and she worked tirelessly to raise awareness about their care. Friends and colleagues often said that helping animals brought her a sense of purpose and joy that rivaled anything she had experienced during her film career. Visitors to her home often noticed how deeply she cared for the animals around her. Dogs, in particular, held a special place in her heart. Many of them were rescues, and she treated them like members of the family. In interviews, she often spoke about how animals gave her unconditional love and comfort during difficult times. For someone who had experienced betrayal and loss in human relationships, that kind of loyalty meant everything. Meanwhile, Ryan continued building his own life outside the shadow of Hollywood. As he grew older and reached his 40s, he began reflecting more openly on the complicated family story that connected him to one of the most famous actresses in history. His comments revealed a mixture of sadness, curiosity, and acceptance about the distance that had existed between them. When news broke in 2019 that Doris Day had passed away peacefully at the age of 97, tributes poured in from around the world. Fans remembered her films, her music, and the optimistic spirit she brought to an entire era of entertainment. For many people, she represented a simpler time in Hollywood, a period when stars seemed to embody kindness and charm. Yet for Ryan, the news carried a far more personal weight. Learning about her passing forced him to confront the reality that the opportunity to reconnect with his grandmother was gone forever. The years of silence between them had become a permanent part of their shared story. In the months that followed, Ryan spoke about how complicated emotions can exist side by side. On one hand, he felt sadness about the distance that had grown between them. On the other hand, he still felt proud of the extraordinary legacy she left behind. After all, Doris Day was not just a grandmother in his family history. She was a woman whose voice, films, and compassion had touched millions of lives. As more people listened to Ryan's perspective, the story began to shift from one of simple mystery to one of human complexity. Families, even famous ones, can experience misunderstandings, distance, and unresolved emotions. Fame does not protect people from those realities. In some cases, it may even make them more difficult to navigate. The revelation from Doris Day's grandson did not erase the joy she brought to audiences around the world. Instead, they added another layer to the story of a woman who had lived nearly a century of life filled with both triumph and hardship. They reminded people that behind every legendary public figure is a private human story that the public may never fully understand. And perhaps that is what makes stories like this so powerful. They reveal that even the most beloved stars carry hidden chapters, stories that remain quietly tucked away for decades until someone close to them finally shares the truth. As time went on, the story surrounding Doris Day's later years continued to raise questions among fans and observers. For decades, she had been one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. Yet the final chapter of her life unfolded almost entirely away from the public eye. Unlike many Hollywood legends who remain active in interviews and public appearances well into old age, Doris chose a different path. She withdrew from the spotlight and rarely spoke about her personal life. That silence only added to the sense that there were parts of her story the world never fully knew. To understand why Doris Day guarded her privacy so carefully, it helps to look back at the difficult experiences she faced early in life. Long before she became a symbol of optimism on screen, her personal life had already been marked by hardship. One of the most shocking moments came after the death of her third husband, when she discovered that he had left her deeply in debt due to poor financial decisions and mismanaged business dealings. Practically overnight, the fortune she believed she had built through years of work had disappeared. For many people, such a discovery might have ended their careers entirely. But Doris refused to give up. Determined to recover financially, she returned to work with incredible discipline. That determination eventually led to her starring in a television series she had never originally intended to make. The show became a success and helped her pay back the enormous debt she had inherited. But the experience left emotional scars that never fully healed. It also reinforced a belief that trust had to be given carefully. Those lessons shaped the way she approached relationships in the decades that followed. Even though the public still saw her as cheerful and approachable, people close to her knew she had become far more protective of her inner circle. She valued loyalty above everything else and preferred the company of a few trusted individuals rather than large social circles. After leaving Hollywood behind, her home in Carmel-by-the-Sea became her sanctuary. The quiet coastal town offered the peace she had been searching for after years in the spotlight. The ocean air, the calm streets, and the slower pace of life gave her the opportunity to focus on what mattered most to her. Instead of film scripts and recording sessions, her days were filled with caring for animals, supporting rescue organizations, and maintaining the charitable foundation she had created. Visitors often described her home as warm but modest compared to what one might expect from a Hollywood icon. There were photographs from her long career, of course, but the atmosphere was far more personal than glamorous. The real center of her home was the animals she cared for. Dogs moved freely around the house, and she treated them with affection that sometimes surprised guests who were meeting her for the first time. Those who knew her during these years often said that the work she did for animals brought her a sense of purpose greater than anything she had experienced in entertainment. She believed strongly that animals depended on humans for kindness and protection, and she used her fame to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. In many ways, this quiet humanitarian work became the true legacy of her later life. Meanwhile, Ryan Melcher continued moving forward with his own life and career. As he grew older, he began to reflect more deeply on the complicated story connecting him to his grandmother. By the time he reached his early 40s, he had built a successful career in real estate and started a family of his own. Yet the questions surrounding his relationship with Doris Day remained a part of his personal history. When Ryan eventually shared his memories publicly, they offered a rare perspective on a side of Doris Day's life that few people had ever seen. His words were not filled with anger or accusation. Instead, they carried a tone of reflection, an attempt to understand how such a distance could have grown between family members who once shared warm moments together. He remembered visiting her when he was younger and spending simple time with her, moments that had nothing to do with Hollywood fame. Those memories remained vivid in his mind. They reminded him that before the silence and distance, there had once been a genuine connection between them. For fans, hearing those reflections created a mixture of emotions. On one hand, it was heartbreaking to imagine such a separation within a family. On the other hand, it served as a reminder that even the most famous lives are shaped by ordinary human challenges, miscommunication, grief, and the complicated nature of relationships. Doris Day herself never publicly addressed these family matters. True to her lifelong habit of protecting her privacy, she allowed the details of her personal life to remain largely unknown. To some people, that silence suggested there were stories she simply did not want the world to examine too closely. To others, it reflected a belief that certain parts of life should remain personal, no matter how famous a person becomes. When she passed away in 2019, the global response showed just how deeply she had touched the world. Tributes poured in from actors, musicians, animal welfare